Hey everybody, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Today it is the 2nd of January, 2022. And on today's show, a look back at TCU's win over Michigan. What does it mean for the Big 12? What do we learn from that game that can be applied for Big 12 teams in spots like this moving forward? And also just some thoughts about TCU's upcoming matchup with the Georgia Bulldogs. So a packed show. That's all coming up next.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Thank you all for making 2022 an excellent year for us. Over 500,000 listens and views across YouTube and wherever you guys listen to your podcast. So appreciate that so much. We'll set some goals here shortly, but if you all have not subscribed before, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at LOBig12, and you guys can find me at JoshNeighbors_. All of those places are great places to engage. Welcome to the new year. Glad to be here in 2023 and in the year 2023, 1 week from today, while I am recording this right now. We have a little bit over a week, obviously, with the extra hours added on. But as I'm recording this, we are a week away from the day where TCU will take on the Georgia Bulldogs in the national championship game in Los Angeles. And just going back, watching the game over again, I've got some thoughts about what happened in this game, the kind of stuff that we can apply to other teams in the league, and kind of what does it mean moving forward. Number one, what does this mean for the Big 12? The Big 12 can play with the big dogs, right? With the Big Tens, with the, with these teams that are, the SECs, obviously. And it was important that this game happened on this day because we saw earlier in the day in the Sugar Bowl, sometimes there are guys who are erasers. And Bryce Young on Saturday morning, at least, was an eraser, right, in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, I don't think anybody was going to beat him that day. Receivers played pretty well, but he was dropping balls in tight windows all day long, and besides generate more pressure, which can be tough to do. Bama's offensive line wasn't great this year, but it can be tough to do against guys like that. He was going to go off that day. It's a reason why he's going to be number one pick probably in this draft this year. He is amazing to watch. And there are guys like that on the Alabamas of the world, on the Georgias of the world, sometimes the Ohio States of the world, sometimes the Michigans of the world. There are players who are just like that, which makes it very, very difficult to beat them. That being said, teams like TCU can still win, and we saw it the other night. And that is encouraging for this league moving forward. I think the one thing I would say is teams built like Kansas State are going to have a tougher time. Teams built like Cincinnati was last year going to have a tougher time. Teams built like TCU are more adequate to contend with teams like Michigan because the one difference is how athletic TCU is. And that's going to be the challenge. It's going to be the key is, can these Big 12 teams build rosters with the same level of athlete that TCU has? And we're talking about guys like Darius Davis. We're talking about guys like Quentin Johnston and Kendre Miller and Amari DiMercato and Tay Barber and Savion Williams. And you have to have all of them at the same time, essentially. You have to have all of them together. More on those guys in a second. But for the league overall, it means they can play with them. They can get in these opportunities. And it's important that this is happening right now. And by right now, what I mean is we just saw the new Big Ten television deal, right? It is going to be basically around or even north of $1 billion a year at this point in time. The SEC will get a new one here in a few years. The ACC has a long time one, so there's kind of different at this point in time. The Pac-12 does not have one yet. The Big 12, it sounds like, has one, and we know there's going to be a pretty significant gap as Texas and Oklahoma go to the SEC and as the Big 12 continues onward, right? But what we saw was, and it was so funny watching the game, is that the reasons why people have knocked the Big 12 before, i.e. it's 7-on-7, that kind of thing, it created what was this dynamic, amazing, entertaining football game where everybody was on the edge of their seats. I know Georgia and Ohio State kind of stole the show because it was later, but that TCU game in the third quarter against Michigan was absolutely bonkers. And I want to give the Michigan coaching staff some credit because some of the stuff they were drawing up there, they schemed some stuff open. They got guys available, and McCarthy did the job for the most part with a lot of those deep shots. It was not the Michigan running game that we thought. And because it was deep shot and things like that, and that's where the turnovers happened for TCU, that's where things really got exciting and really got interesting in this game. And I tweeted this out. It's the Big 12 game has broken out, and everybody was freaking loving it. Everyone was enjoying this to the max, and what this had to deliver. And one of the reasons why TCU won and TCU never trailed is because they thrive in games like that. They thrive in the back and forth chaotic kind of mess that was created. And they've been down this year. We've seen it multiple times, but they never got down in this game. It felt like it was trending those directions, but they always had the counter punch after the punch. And while do I think that kind of style is always going to be easy to play in games like this? If you're playing against Ohio State if Marvin Harrison's still in the game and Emeka Egbuka and all those guys, no, I don't think that you can live that way. But at least in this game, they were able to, and this style can work at a certain time. And it kind of gets to point number 2 for me. Stars matter to a point, right? This is something that a lot of people talk about. I thought Ari Wasserman over from The Athletic, he does a podcast, Andy Staples does a really good job. And he wrote a really good piece about TCU kind of in a way, they are debunking kind of this idea that stars matter, right? And, that kind of stuff is it matters. It's why we love National Signing Day. It is why National Signing Day is so significant. It's why these recruiting classes are so significant. It is why the blue chip ratio exists, right? The blue chip ratio is something, for those of you who do not know, it is done by the folks over at 24/7. It's done by Bud Elliott specifically. It's basically a national championship winning formula, right? And what it says is you need to have more 5 and 4 stars than you do 3 stars on your roster. He says, to put it simply, win national championship college football, teams need to sign more 4 and 5 star recruits, aka blue chips, than 2 and 3 star players over the previous 4 recruiting classes. This has been true basically as far back as the modern internet recruiting rankings have existed. Media will sometimes hype up a team which has not met the threshold of the national title contender, but history has not shown that this is a smart practice. Think Wisconsin, Baylor, Michigan State, TCU, Utah, Cincinnati over the last decade. Even the Bearcats, who made the last college ball playoff, were really no match for a blue chip team built like Alabama, right? So if you go ahead and you look this year, there were I'm looking at the list right now. There were 15 teams that he's got listed that can win a national championship. The lowest team he had was Auburn, which 54% of its roster are made of 4 and 5 stars. The highest was Alabama, who was 89% 4 and 5 stars. Ohio State, Georgia, OU, A&M, Texas, LSU, Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State, Miami were all on there. TCU has broken through this mold and has a chance to win it. Will they? I don't know. But the fact that they're there playing in this game is significant because, and I like to see Bud's numbers on how many teams have actually made the title game breaking this threshold, right? I think Clemson lost to Bama a few years ago and broke and was not in the threshold, but I think they lost that game. So you're seeing what I mean here when I say I don't know how many schools, but think about it, like Alabama, Georgia last year, LSU, Clemson a few years ago. You kind of just go down and down the list and like think about the title games. The title games normally involve 2 teams that fit this bill, that fit this model, or, Ohio State versus Alabama, whatever, so on and so forth. Right. So TCU has broken this mold just a bit. And what is the big difference? What is the big difference when it comes down to this? And I will say, I think this is the next thing. Coaching is huge. Coaching is absolutely imperative for what TCU did, because I thought for that whole game, most of that game, third quarter offensively, the things that happened for Michigan were pretty good. But I thought for most of the game, TCU was a better coached team. Besides that Donovan Edwards run in the beginning of the game, TCU did a great job of containing what Michigan did well. They were able to get up in the gaps in the offensive line. They committed a lot of guys between the tackles to stopping the run, and oftentimes it worked out for them very, very well. They held up in coverage on the backside in those situations pretty well. The play action stuff got them a few times, right? That they were had. But that being said, they made other plays as well. If you're going to give up some stuff in the passing game, you better make some plays in the passing game. That's not unfamiliar to Big 12 defenses, right? Big 12 defenses sometimes, especially when things got super pointsy, we talked about teams that, all right, you might give it up, but can you force turnovers and make plays? That's what you have to do. You have to have a playmaking defense. That's what a lot of these schools where, all right, if our personnel is not as good, we have to find ways to force turnovers if we're going to give up points to schools like Texas and Oklahoma, and even this year, TCU, right? Baylor and Oklahoma State not as much to pass because their offense last year weren't as good. But you all kind of get to maybe even Iowa State, right, when they had their prime offense going. Forcing turnovers is what did them in a lot of times, and force bad decisions. That is what TCU did. I tweeted this out, but I thought Joe Gillespie, no matter how many points they gave up in this game, I thought he coached one hell of a football game. I thought he did an excellent job because those guys were confident. They never got down at any point. They got the stops they needed to get in this game, and they scored the points they needed to, right? 2 defensive touchdowns were, absolutely the massive difference in this. And also, I know they didn't really force that fumble on the goal line, but they picked up that ball on the goal line, which was clearly a fantastic, meaningful play. And so I thought Joe Gillespie was dialing things up all night. I thought TCU was causing problems for them, on the defensive side of the ball for a lot of the evening. And they had 4 sacks in this game. All of them came from the game of his life. I mean, Dylan Horton, he had some moments there, especially in that championship game against Kansas State, where I thought he really, was playing fantastic. He kind of had a little stretch there. I think he got back-to-backs or 2 sacks in the same possession. Right, but this is 6 sacks in his last 2 games. This is 6 sacks against Michigan and Kansas State combined. It's 4 against Michigan, against a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. A forced fumble in there, as well, and a pass deflection. He had a dominant football game. We had mentioned a whole lot about how this defensive line needed to have the games of their lives. Dylan Horton had the game of his life. But he has been trending in this direction ever since that championship game. He is a difference maker. And I thought, their ability to kind of free him up and get him involved. They were so confident going against that Michigan offensive line and what they thought they're going to be able to do, and they were able to accomplish at a lot of points this game. Once again, they had some problems in the back end. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they ended up giving up, totally offense, 528 yards of offense. But it was a lot of big chunk plays. They held Michigan below 5 rushing yards per play. And also, if you take out that massive scamper in the beginning, that was a whole lot of it. And they forced the 3 turnovers necessary to get themselves. So coaching was huge. And then on the offensive side, I thought Garrett Riley did a really good job. I thought Garrett Riley had this team prepared, had this team ready. Their mistakes were avoidable. The fumble from DeMercado was avoidable. The 2 drops that turned into interceptions were avoidable. That was not a coaching thing. That was players not making plays. The first throw was a little tough, a little tight in there from Max Duggan, but I thought it was not an interception where they throw. Obviously, Darius Davis gets popped in the chest. I actually said that was a 3rd down play. I thought they would go to Davis there, and Davis gets just it hits him in the chest, loses the ball. They turn it over. Obviously, DeMercado fumble in a critical moment, but they always stayed composed. They always rallied because they thrived in that position. And a big part of this, guys, skill. The one advantage we talked about coming into this game that TCU had over Michigan, especially with Blake Corum out, was their skill position players they just have more good skill position players than basically every single team they play. And I would contend that it's actually somewhat true when they play Georgia too. Like this TCU bunch, it's not just I mean, these are all pretty good players, right? I don't think they were all like bad recruits, whatever. I have to go back and check. But all of these guys have developed into very dynamic skill players. Like the fact that you switch out Kendre Miller, who was 8 for 57, for Amari DiMercato, who went 17 for 150 and a touchdown, is that's like next level stuff. That is what the Georgias and the Alabamas, that's what they do, right? Oh, Jalen Hurts out of the game. Tua comes into the game. Young Devontae Smith is in the game. All these freshmen are in the game making plays in the bowl games. Look at these guys who are going to be stars of the future. TCU has developed guys to that point. Tay Barber caught a touchdown. Darius Davis now has the drop, but is obviously an important player for them. Didn't even play that well. Jordan Hudson, they didn't even get the ball to Savion Williams. Quentin Johnston has the big game. As I mentioned, DiMercato and Kendre Miller, and you pair that up with Max Duggan, it's going to go really well. So they've cultivated these skill players, and you need to have guys like this. You need to have difference makers. Think about the Tay Barber touchdown earlier in the game. They give enough space and that side empties out. He's a burner. He can fly. He can go. They cleared it out. Touchdown easy. Quentin Johnston needed to clear one, and then it was, hey, see ya. And that's a big dude. That is a big dude who was hauling ass downfield on that one play. So that skill matters, and they need to make that skill matter in the following game. And I'll tell you what, we'll get more into this, but there is a lot of conversation about, hey, how good of a corner is Kelee Ringo? Very good corner, really good player, will be a first-round pick. But obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. is a tough cover. But if you have elite wide receivers, and Quentin Johnston is definitely an elite wide receiver, Ringo has gotten burned before, and not just by Marvin Harrison Jr. There are other games where teams are able to move the football and able to target a guy like a Kelee Ringo. So there's that too. But something else that we have to mention about this, kind of getting back to this, and we always kind of acknowledge this all the time. We always talk about this position, in sports, is the quarterback play, right? What was the recipe for them? Max Duggan was not excellent in this game from number standpoint. 14 for 29, 2 TDs, 2 picks, and then ran for 2 scores as well. But on those 2 plays I talked about, all right, the 2 touchdowns, the pass that he threw, I think it's essentially the same play. I think it's kind of almost like a screen, and you have to get the ball near the line of scrimmage to make sure there's no legal man blocking downfield, anything like that. What is really important on that play is that when eventually the pressure does come, that the quarterback has to get, like, you need the guy who's got to make sure he can deliver the time. And I know it's a pretty easy throw because everybody's out of there, but you have to drill that play down. You have to nail that play down in practice. You have to be able to, in whatever moment it is, whatever part of the field it is, recognize the pressure, extend that play, clear out that space, and deliver the ball. It sounds easy when you watch it, but you think about all the components that go into that play. It takes a guy recognizing all of that stuff to make sure he gets out. If they bring an extra rusher and that guy gets through, you really have to get on your horse, to make sure that you can clear out. So there is an angle, right? Because you don't want to throw that ball back. You can throw it a little bit across the field, but you don't want to throw it back across the field to any traffic. And so a big part of that is making sure you clear out and make sure you get far enough back in the line to give those guys space and to make that throw. He did that twice. Great execution on that. A couple of, the touchdowns, short yardage situations, good job. They finally gave him the ball. They made things happen with that. Quarterback play is a huge difference. And you can tell the disappointment that Max Duggan suffered from that the Kansas State loss. We saw it after the game. And he said, college football playoff, whatever. We just wanted to give this championship to TCU. And, ironically enough, on a day where Kansas State gets smoked, the Big 12 champion, the team that was kind of the Big 12 regular season champion, if you will, TCU, goes and gets the job done against the Michigan team. And Max was a huge part of that. Once again, the numbers won't flash to you, but those 2 picks were not his fault. Basically, the 4 total touchdowns for him, he had a massive day on both the ground and through the air. and he was a huge difference maker in this contest. And there is no doubt about it. He will have to be once again because, all those guys that they've got over on the other side from, for Georgia, and we'll go through the entire list at a different time. Playmakers, Carter, your Wyatts of the world, the guys that they've had through their Davis before, Ringo now, like that team is always, always, always absolutely stacked when it comes to the defensive side of the ball and playmaking and whatnot. And usually the one thing that actually they don't do a whole lot is that team rarely has to rush a whole lot of guys. Now, it's funny because they did commit more resources to making CJ Stroud uncomfortable in this game. That was something that they really, they definitely kind of prioritized in this game. Actually, I'm finally looking at the tackle guys now. We'll see some Tyke Smith. I believe he's still playing, right? All the guys they've had, past and present, whatnot. This is a team that always has not had to bring a ton of pressure. I think about Devontae Wyatt last year. That's why I mentioned him earlier on. I think about Devontae Wyatt, and I think about Jordan Davis. I think about other guys that had the defensive line last year, and also the linebacking core, right? Nolan Smith's the world, guys like that. They never really had to bring that much pressure because, obviously Nolan Smith this year, and they lose him, which sucks. But because those guys could get home, and then Georgia, even when I was at Missouri, usually kept everything ahead of them. They did a great job of that, right? I'm wondering if they'll be able to do that this year. TCU's offensive line has struggled at times. There have definitely been times that TCU offensive line has not been an elite group, and they're going to need to play their best game if they want to win that game coming up here on next Monday night. So I will say, like, that QB play, it's got to be fantastic again, but it was not elite level. But still, it was pretty good. And look, TCU's got room they can definitely improve upon. Obviously, Michigan did too, and I think Georgia will too. But I'll tell you what, Stetson Bennett and Max Duggan are two guys who have gone through some pretty weird stories in their college careers, and Bennett's got a chance to make it back-to-back. You saw the emotion when Ohio State missed the kick. Duggan obviously gets his shot at redemption after the K-State game and did not disappoint. And this game is going to be, obviously, the build-up is going to be very exciting because of what TCU and Georgia just put on. And we'll have more on Georgia later on, but that game was a lot of fun. Max Duggan maybe makes some plays with his feet. That'll be exciting, right? That's kind of a situation here. If you want to pressure him, he'll be asked to make some plays with his feet. So I think that would be the best way to do it. Sorry, I'm just reading a message. We're going to talk Steven Simcox tomorrow, which is exciting. Locked on Horned Frogs. Which is nice. So yeah, I think there is a whole lot to break down this game, but obviously looking back at the Michigan game, a huge day for the Big 12 Conference. Some validation, just some good feelings. I know that they'll be in the playoff when it's a 12 team, but they've debunked the narrative that you can win they've now won a playoff game in the CFP 4-team CFP era, and they were in serious danger of not having that be the case and being the only school that was not the case with them, right? They were not able to get the job done in the CFP. And so that is huge. It's really massively important, I think, that they were able to do so. They're able to get the job done and able to now play for a national championship in the 14 playoff era. That's huge. All right, so that will do it for today's show. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at LOBig12. You guys can find me at JoshNeighbors_. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, all of those things. Till next time, my friends, as always, stay safe.